Welcome to the second hour of American Agenda. I'm Katrina Zish, and Bob Sellers has the day off. The U.S. military is monitoring the suspected Chinese surveillance balloon, which has been floating above the northern U.S. for the last few days. Our national correspondent Logan Raddick is live in our Washington newsroom with the latest. Logan.
Well, Katrina, the Pentagon says that Chinese balloon is over the central United States heading east over Kansas and Missouri. We've heard Kansas from Senator Roger Marshall, Missouri from the National Weather Center. And also, Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder is denying China's claim that the balloon is a civilian aircraft used for scientific research.
We are aware of the PRC's statement. However, the fact is we know that it's a surveillance balloon. And I'm not going to be able to be more specific than that. We do know that the balloon has violated U.S. airspace and international law, which is unacceptable.
And Ryder says the balloon can be maneuvered, but he won't say whether or not the Chinese government is controlling it. Ryder also said that the spy balloon will be floating inside the U.S. for another few days. And President Biden decided not to shoot down the balloon despite calls from Republicans, including Donald Trump and Mike Pence, to do so. Today, Secretary of State Antony Blinken postponed his trip to China, originally scheduled for next week. A U.S. official says Blinken does not want that balloon to dominate his meetings with Chinese leaders. And that balloon was first spotted about 65,000 feet above Billings, Montana on Wednesday, well above commercial air traffic. Montana is home to a nuclear-armed ICBM base, and the government is taking steps to shield sensitive sites across the country. Ryder says that the balloon, quote, does not present a military physical threat to the people on the ground, and President Biden declining to answer questions about the balloon.
If you want to ask me a question about the economy, but I'm not going to answer any question about anything else because you never will cover this.
And if you recall, just a few days ago, the Air Force rejected China's plan to build a giant corn mill less than 15 miles from a base in North Dakota. Republicans on the House Armed Services Committee, they're calling on the Defense Department and the intelligence community to inform them if U.S. national security is compromised by this Chinese spy balloon. Katrina.
Logan, thanks so much for following this story for us. Appreciate it. And we continue the coverage of the Chinese spy balloon that Logan was just talking about. Where could it possibly go next? We're turning not to the president, not to the Pentagon, but to meteorologist Mike Masco. He has some ideas. Mike, once again, never expecting probably in your meteorological career that you would be tracking the actual an actual Chinese spy balloon, but you are. You have a map based on weather patterns. What should we look for?
Well, it's so interesting because yesterday we were actually able, Katrina, to do a parcel track of this location and track it right over to central China. Where they released this balloon was right over jet stream winds that were 150 knots. That took it right across the Bering Sea and into the country. Whether it was planned or not, that's exactly how it happened. And when you get into jet stream winds, you're talking about a big deal. And that's why we are going to see this balloon probably get into the waters of the Atlantic sometime by Sunday night. Let's take a look at this. The jet stream winds right now are ranging anywhere from 90 to 120 knots across Minneapolis. Meanwhile, there is a low-level jet across Omaha. The question becomes, is this jet being influenced by the jet stream over Minneapolis or a little jet streak over Kansas City? That's going to dictate where it goes. If it's a northern jet, this is going to be a balloon tracking into central and western Pennsylvania, maybe directly over D.C. That would be very ironic. The other track would bring it across Kansas City into Memphis and into Nashville. So that is if it's kind of guided more towards the south. We're talking about this balloon being the size of 3, buses. Well, that means that the winds are going to guide this a little bit quicker, and that's why we're keeping a very close eye on maybe that 90 to 120 knot jet to the north. So what does this mean? Well, even if you kind of split the difference, we're looking at a track through Omaha into St. Louis. The weather conditions, by the way, across across the Ohio Valley and mid-Mississippi Valley are going to be ideal in terms of visibility. So we may be able to spot this thing in a place like St. Louis or Cincinnati, or even down just north of Atlanta and into Roanoke as we go into the tail end of this weekend. So really a fascinating journey to see this. And again, we can actually trace its origins all the way back towards central China sometime in the middle of last week. So wild stuff for sure.
Absolutely. Mike, thank you so much. Love the maps where you're tracking the balloon and all of that. And as you mentioned, would be ironic or maybe something else if it does end up over Washington, D.C. All right, we're going to keep an eye on the spy balloon. And again, Mike, thank you so much.
You got it. Have a good weekend.
You too. And we're continuing this unique and very scary story, truly, with this spy balloon with Air Force Brigadier General Blaine Holt. General Holt, great to be with you and have you with us, I should say, and also Fred Fleitz joining us, two experts here in the field. And Fred, we did have Blaine on earlier, so I'd like to start with you. Your reaction to this, why do you think we're potentially not shooting this down? Do you think the reasons the administration are giving us are accurate?
I don't. I'm not sure they know how to react to this. One expert told me that it may be so high it would be difficult to shoot down, except with a very expensive missile. I got to tell you, the fact that Anthony Blinken has canceled his trip to China over this indicates that the Chinese have lied to the administration. This is not a civilian device. This is not a civilian airship. We know from the Pentagon today, this is a maneuverable spy balloon. And I think it's an enormously serious provocation. And it seems to me that the Biden administration is struggling on how to respond to it.
General Holt, you mentioned when you were on in the last hour that you feel that it's important to shoot this down, not just to show that the U.S. is strong and taking this seriously, but also to get a look at that balloon.
Yes, we absolutely need to get that balloon down. There's several different ways technologically to achieve that. Would have been far easier had we just done it before it entered over our landmass. But we can bring that balloon down. We have that ability, and we need to examine what is and what's inside it. And it's a foregone conclusion that it's a surveillance balloon. I will take that at face value. But nobody really truly knows what's on board that thing. And yet here it is by your own meteorologists' weather predictions on its way to be right over our nation's capital. And I can think of a myriad of things on board that thing that I would not want if it was going to fly over Washington, D.C. This is a very, very dangerous situation. And honestly, at the strategic levels, we have put ourselves in a very bad position.
Yeah, Fred, you know, we've heard from the Pentagon. We saw that the president really has no interest in answering questions about this serious threat, as General Holt mentioned. But also, this is the very first time that anything like this has come into our airspace since World War II. And that was when the Japanese fire balloons, that's what they were. And back in the 1940s, they're called Fugo balloons. They were actual firebomb balloons. Hydrogen balloons outfitted with incendiary devices intended to start large forest fires in the Pacific Northwest. At the end of the day, they only ended up killing 6 Americans, but civilian Americans. But again, this is not something that is typical to happen.
Well, it's not typical, but I'm hearing conflicting stories on whether there may have been instances of this happening in the past, and it wasn't reported. One expert told me that China routinely uses balloons like this to surveil U.S. military forces in the Pacific. So balloons like this may have been flying over ships and maybe Hawaii in the past, and we just haven't heard reports of it. We need to have Congress investigate this. How frequently does this happen? And what risk does this really play? The problem is these balloons can loiter, unlike a satellite. They can stay over a missile site, collect an enormous amount of data, and then move on to another site. This is something we need to learn a lot more about.
Yeah, and Blaine, just a few things that as we conjecture and we guess. I mean, it's like, could a person be in the balloon? Could there also be chemicals in the balloon? Is the balloon able to be steered or driven or directed? I mean, give us some of your insight on this from your military experience.
Until you have it in your hands, you're never truly going to know. It's an airborne sensor, and being an Air Force guy, I can tell you an airborne sensor is ubiquitous. You can put anything you want on that thing. And so making assumptions about what it is we're looking at, that's one thing. But military professionals should be looking at getting control of it and then taking it apart. At the strategic level, historically, since we have a little history going on here, I'd refer everybody to go back to the strategic impact to Russia when Mateusz Rust flew a Cessna 172 from Helsinki to Moscow's Red Square. That afternoon, Gorbachev fired over 100 officers. In what I'm getting at here is there needs to be accountability for failing to secure our nation.
All right. General Blaine Holt, stick around. And Fred Fleitz, thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.